CCTV YouTube channel, and you can see us there. Welcome to everybody on YouTube. I'm just going to refresh, and we are live there as well. CCTV YouTube channel, and I'll mute that. Okay, so I think we're about ready to begin here. Also go to local recording going. Okay, so we've got our attendees in. We're at the top of the hour. Welcome, everybody. I'm Derek Auger, the Executive Director with Conservatory Canada, and welcome to the Friday webinar. We're streaming live on the Conservatory Canada TV YouTube channel, and we also have a live audience here in Zoom who can ask questions whenever they want. And I'm just going to do a little introduction here, a couple of things about our database, actually, and I'll tell you what kind of webinars we have coming up. The new database, I know for those that haven't used it yet, or those that have and are wondering or having issues, the tricky part with this database is we're trying to take all of your existing accounts and links to your students, their academic records, etc., from the old database and migrate them to the new system. They're already there, but when you go in and you try and link that to your old account through a couple of simple steps we have, it's proving difficult for about half of you. So half of you actually need to call us or give us an email, and we can connect you to our support team so that they can just execute a really simple password reset. The procedure for itself is a little bit cumbersome, but the hardest part is really just emailing us and asking for help. The rest of it's actually quite easy. But what that step, those of you that will need to do that, what it guarantees is that you will be still linked to the stuff in the old database, to your old account. If we simply create a new account for you, you're going to lose all those records, and those old records may actually disappear on us. So that's the tricky part about this whole database. It's a very complex database because of all the academic records, because of the links that were hard-coded in there. Our company, Invorg, our tech company, has found a really neat way to migrate all that data into our new Microsoft database. It's just a little bit tricky, and it's proving difficult. So we appreciate your patience. Those of you that have had some trouble, I know a lot of you have already made that link because you have students registering for exams. But if you haven't activated your new teacher portal yet, we encourage you to do that now rather than wait for this crunch between February and June, because we're going to get overwhelmed at that time with requests. So you can help us out by logging into that now and seeing if it makes sense. You can do that through our website, and maybe I'll just share my screen for a second just to show you where this all is here. If I go to our homepage on the website, these handy links at the top right corner, teacher portal, student portal, those are the links that take you to the new portals. And if you're here and you're a brand new teacher, you've never had an account with us before, you're going to use option 1, create a new account, and that's pretty seamless. If you're an existing student, teacher, or examiner with an account, an active account, you can use option 4. But if you haven't yet received an activation link, because a lot of email servers block these things, you're going to use 2 and 3, depending if you're a student or if you're a teacher or examiner. For most of you on this call, it's going to be option 3. And you fill in your first name, last name, give us 2 email addresses, and we'll send you an activation link. Some of you aren't getting those activation links, again, because your email server is blocking them. That's where you have to reach out to us, and we can get connected with the tech team, and they can force a simple password reset, and they'll be able to send it to your email address much easier that way. So that's the procedure for doing that. I'm going to mention that over the next couple of weeks as well, just to try and get as many of you online with that as possible. Thank you for your patience as we're linking you into that new database. It's just a lot more complicated than most companies go through. And I think when most companies move databases, those are the we were online shopping with or things like that, you just lose all the old records. They abandon them because it's so hard to migrate. Being an academic institution, it's a lot more difficult for us. So today's presentation, we're going to have Christopher Norton here, as you can see, and he's going to present to us on advanced repertoire for students from grades 9, 10, and even the associate level through some newer publications that he has out. Next Friday, we're going to have Eleanor Gummer and Cécile de Rosier back to talk about women composers and the French connection, featuring some different French composers with advanced grades material. Mel Bonis, Charlotte Sohi are the 2 of the 3 names that come to mind there in terms of composers they're going to cover. And again, they work exclusively with music by women composers, music that's forgotten, suppressed over time, and they're enlightening us with all of this new music, which is really wonderful. And then on Friday, December the 9th, that's going to be the last webinar for the season until the holidays kick in, and we'll resume again in mid-January. Deborah Wanless is going to join us on that for a look at one-handed piano repertoire, which promises to be really interesting. So I don't think Chris needs any introduction necessarily. This is his first time joining us this year, I believe. So Chris, thanks for being here and joining us today for this repertoire session. And we know you're going to talk about advanced repertoire. You'll see the screenshots, but I've got my Connections 9 and Connections 10 here that Chris has recently given me. I've also got that Idaho Suite around somewhere. I couldn't find that today, but you're going to see what that all looks like. And so I hope you enjoy this, everybody. And Chris, thanks for being here. We'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Derek. I'll just share my screen straight away so you can see what I'm looking at. And this is advanced piano repertoire. I'm thinking of grade 10, well, grade 9, 10 and above, broadly speaking. There's a picture of me at home in the background, microjazz connections 2 and 3, which have recently been added to with connections, with microjazz collections 4 and 5. So, but they're probably about grade 5, 6 kind of level. What I'm talking about today is harder still, but not frightening. So the books that I'm going to be referencing is the Idaho Suite for piano, the Jazz Piano Sonata, Connections 9, and Connections 10, and that's beef stroganoff. So we'll get rid of that for a moment, and Connections 10 is there. And I'm going to also do previews of the Bulgarian Suite and the Second Piano Sonata, which are about to come out through 80 Days Publishing. All of these are available through Deborah Wanless in Canada. She's our distributor, so you can get them, apart from the 2 at the bottom there, you can get all the rest of them very easily and very quickly from her. So do bear that in mind. Now, the Idaho Suite's a really interesting case. I haven't done this very much, but this is one occasion where I have had to do it, and that is written for a whole lot of graduate students at the University of Idaho. And it was masterminded by Giovanni Re de Pedro, who was a very fine concert pianist and pedagogue and very popular American teacher, who sadly died at the age of 37 from malaria while he was touring for his charity. This is probably about 4 years ago or so. So he's no longer with us, but his legacy still continues in various guises, one of them being the Idaho Suite. The pieces in this vary greatly in style because they're written based on videos of students talking to me, not playing to me, but just talking to them about their interests, their backgrounds, and so on. And so I took what they appeared to be like as people and wrote pieces based on that. And so I've written Schumann style, effectively musical pen portraits for 6 people, including Giovanni. The last one was written for him. The premiere took place in November 2017. With the original people playing, and I've got videos. It's not great sound, but you'll be able to get a good idea of them, of the original dedicatees playing the pieces. Again, as I mentioned before, all available through 80 Days Publishing, but your best bet is to go straight to deborahwanless.com and look there. Now, the first piece up is called See Me Later, rather a strange title, but it's in C major, and I'm asked quite often by teachers if I've got anything that I can recommend that's kind of Baroque in style, but not a Baroque piece. And this is very much this case. The young man who I wrote this for talked about himself, and he struck me as being someone who wouldn't really want to be playing pop music. So I wrote a semi-Bach-ian piece, like a proper Baroque thing, but it goes off in various unexpected directions as well. You can see the music in front of you there, and you can tell when you hear it, it's got a lot of kind of Bachian overtones. So this is my first offering for something which would be fun for some of your more advanced students to play if they'd like to do something alongside playing Baroque repertoire. So there you go. So that's quite a firecracker of a piece, and that's the first piece in the Idaho Suite. Now, the second piece is total contrast, and in fact, Derek, am I allowed to ask you a question in the middle of talking here?
Absolutely, you can.
Am I allowed to mention another examination board?
Oh yeah, you can do that.
This has just been put on the list for the new RCM syllabus. So it's come up on another examination board. I mean, obviously, the beauty of the Conservatory Canada is that you can choose any piece from the book. They're suggesting just this one, but at least it's come up on another Canadian examination board already. It's a piece called Airy, and Morgan Klein, who wrote it, is a lovely girl who came from Alaska. And she talked on her video about the wide open spaces and the fact that they lived in a place with beautiful vistas. And she also talked a little bit about the views from Alaska from the air. What I didn't know until a couple of months later was, in fact, her father died in a plane crash when she was about 12. And it was a kind of reference to her, and it became a kind of memorial piece for her father as well. So it's a very mysterious and aerial kind of piece. So here's Airy, played by its dedicatee, Morgan Klein. So that's very different for me, isn't it? I mean, it's I've written pieces like this in the past, but having been sidetracked for 40 years by microjazz connections and other things, this is getting closer to the kind of impressionist nature-like pieces which I wrote before I left New Zealand, and which I've got. In fact, is a set of pieces called Bush Pieces for Piano, which my company is about to put out, which I wrote when I was something like 16, which is a little bit more on this kind of vein. The final piece in the Idaho Suite, which I'd like to bring to your attention, there's a bit of a sort of joke about the title, because the girl who played this, her name was Melody, and so I thought I'd call the piece Unchained Melody. That's the joke. But she was surprisingly kind of feisty as an individual, and so I wrote a very aggressive toccata-like piece, overtones of Bartok toccata and kind of style. And this is called Unchained from the Idaho Suite. And be prepared to be quite surprised. You can tell that's quite a crowd pleaser, that one. So again, three very contrasting pieces out of a book of six, and the others are just as contrasting to these as well, written for a variety of people and therefore in a variety of kind of genres. So you might find those very interesting additions to your repertoire for more advanced students from the Idaho Suite. Now, the second thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the Jazz Piano Sonata. This was commissioned by Giovanni Re di Pedro, and it's three movements, so it lasts about 10 minutes, I think, and it's a very much a crowd pleaser. And in fact, one of the nice stories about this, it was premiered in Australia at the National Conference. And I've been doing quite a lot of work recently with a wonderful pianist from Moncton called Roger Lord, who has toured all over the world. He's been to China 32 times as a piano soloist, but he was also at the National Conference in Australia when this was premiered, and said how striking it was and how much the audience liked it. But another person who came up to me about a year later and said, I heard that at this conference and thought it was a fantastic piece, was Randy Faber. So there's a couple of people who are in that audience who've come to me subsequently and said how useful a piece it appeared to be for being a crowd pleaser and also for being a firecracker of a piece. So there it was, 2013 at the Australasian Piano Pedagogy Conference. Also available by Deborah Wallace's company. The first movement, you can see the music here. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it'll take a bit long, but I'll show you as much as we've got on screen here. You can see it's got a main theme, which is quite lyrical. It's at the beginning there, and then it has a kind of interesting rising sequence, which you can see at the bottom of the first page. And the second theme comes in at bar 24 on the second page, second to last line. It's almost like a little Spanish theme. And these elements are kind of played around with in a free form fashion, but it's very much a sonata form kind of movement. So here's the first movement of the Jazz Piano Sonata. And I've got some analytical notes which you can look at as you're hearing it as well. There we go. I'm not going to go through all those, but you can just sort of glance at those as a place. Second theme. And so on. So that's tantalizing, isn't it? I stopped there. It goes into kind of ragtime at that point. So the piece develops and builds to a big climax based on the second theme. So it's a very satisfying structure, I think, that first movement as well. So the second movement of this is, funny enough, is based on another piece of mine called Sierra from the Rock Preludes collection. And I took the opening from Sierra and built a whole piece around it. Sierra is a desert piece. And it says mysterious. It's a very mysterious piece with very wide textures. And there's my point about it being from there. The first melody unfolds full of big leaps and continue dissolving into ethereal triplets. Isn't that nice? And then the music sinks down a half step, becomes even more mysterious, and a second main idea which emerges, which is built on and played on, becoming ever more ornate before a final segment of the main theme winds the piece to a peaceful conclusion. Here it is. Again, tantalizingly, I've shut it down there because that's all the music you can see on the page. But you can see it's building up very well, and it builds even further before it dies away to a very peaceful conclusion, as it says in the notes. Now, the third movement is the one that actually, at the first performance, it got a standing ovation. And I'm always reminded, not that I'm comparing myself at all, but one of my favorite stories about premieres was the Ravel Piano Concerto, which was premiered, I think, in 1932. And the finale was encored at its first performance. People liked it so much they wanted to hear it again immediately. So I'm hoping this finale might have an element of that people will like it straight away. It's weirdly an 11/8, it's 6/8 plus 5/8. You can see most of the time. And the main theme is a long paragraph followed by a new idea that's intended to build excitement. And then a very Phrygian idea comes in, which mixes 3, 4, and 6/8. This is at the bottom of the third page on the music here. I'll play a bit of this. This builds a really big climax using the second theme and quite heroic before a furious finish. But I'll play what we've got on screen at the moment. So I've got some notes here again, which you can sort of glance at as you're hearing it. Phrygian theme. And so on. So that's the finale of the piano sonata. So the jazz piano sonata in 3 movements, all can be done as separate pieces or done in a recital as a piece with 3 movements. So do consider that for some of your more adventurous students. I've heard this played, by the way, a number of times now on YouTube by teenage boys so far, but they do a very good job of it. So as a lot of the time, you'll find that students will actually relate to it quite well, even though it appears on the surface to be quite difficult. Now we're on to something which you might be more familiar with. This is Connections 9 and 10, which have come out in the last 3 or 4 years. And Connections began as a series of 8 books and is now 11 books. We have a preparatory book and also 9 and 10 at the top end. And it's in popular styles, and every book contains backing tracks, which are free. It's a whole mixture of styles: jazz, rock, Latin, blues, country, all sorts, semi-classical, everything. And the play-along recordings are available at practice and performance tempos, which is wonderful, and available to download so a student can feel like what it's like to play with their own band, as it says. And Connections seems to resonate with students of all ages by giving them relevant modern music they'll want to play. And I think if you get a book, you'll find the student will like all the pieces in the book. That's my discovery so far. The first piece in Connections 9 is called At 8, funny enough. And it's a very jazzy piece. Here we go. So that's a kind of Latin piece, and the backing track reveals all. So if you find a student wants to do this, it's quite nice for you to then say to them the backing track's available. Do try it out once you've got the notes under your fingers. Now, I mentioned Roger Lord. His brother was Premier of New Brunswick, I believe. So Wendy, my wife, is 40 years in New Brunswick, so she knows all about that. And so they're quite an illustrious family. But he's a wonderful pianist, and he's recorded all of Connections 9 and 10, and we put them on my YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is called Christopher Micro Jazz, and do go and subscribe to that if you haven't already. And here's Roger's performance of Tenerife Tango from Connections 9. No, it's not. It's my performance. He's coming up shortly. Don't move. Now that's my performance, and Rogers are also available. So you've actually got two different performers doing these pieces, which I find great because he has a different angle on it, being more of a straight classical pianist, you might say. I have very much a sort of jazz and pop background as well, so I play it in a certain way, and I find it fascinating to hear the two interpretations, if you like. Tear Away is one of my favorite pieces from Connections 9. And this is a kind of disco funk. I haven't actually heard that many pieces in this kind of style in piano literature. And I think I'm right in saying this is my performance, and here's what it sounds like with the music in front of. And so on. Now, with track, this is where it really gets exciting. And this is a particularly amazing piece with track. So here it is with the band playing. Tantalizing, but let's go on. So connections 10, harder still, and I've got a little bit of Saturday Night here, which is one of my favorites. And when I'm doing performances, I'm asked to give a performance somewhere. This is often a piece I choose because I know it's an immediate crowd pleaser. Saturday Night with backing track. Tantalizing, but let's go on. Caronte. Now, this is a very interesting one. This was written for a New Zealand pianist who was actually doing. I'm just going to stop that for a moment and go back on that because, in fact, hang on a minute, get this right. So Caronte was written for this pianist who was doing the Bach French suites and wanted pieces commissioned which would accompany the Bach French suite. So this was my contribution to that project. So again, it's a kind of bordering on Baroque piece. And if you look at the last page here, in the bottom line, you'll see there's an actual quote from a Bach French suite. So it's a very contrapuntal piece, and it's quite tricky, particularly when it gets to, I'm just looking at, when it gets to the third page, you'll see just how tricky it gets. But here's Caronte from Connections 10, played by the composer again on the YouTube channel. Oh, there you go. Now here's Roger at last, and he's playing a very interesting piece called Salamanca. It's a Spanish piece, obviously. It includes tapping on the top of the piano, and it's very much a flamenco piece for piano. and so on. And the Stratford Shuffle, which is this one here, a great favorite of mine from Connections 10. And again, I thought it was quite nice for you to hear this, a bit of this anyway, played by Roger. So you can hear that somebody who's like a proper concert pianist, if you like, makes good sense of these as well. He finds these both very useful for teaching purposes. Students love the books, but also he finds them very useful for concert performances. He's just recently being an Ankara in Turkey and gave a performance in which the second half was Connections 9 and 10 pieces done as a group of pieces. And he said it was very effective as audience pleasers, if you like. So that's what the piece looks like. Here's his performance alongside it. Wow. Stratford Shuffle with track. Now, I'm not going to play the whole thing, but just to show you what this is like, because it's quite wonderful to play with. Well, I like it anyway. Tantalizingly, I'm going to stop there, but you get the idea. So those tracks are all available, as I said, free, and the links are in the books, I believe. So all available still from Deborah Wallace in Canada. Out soon, the Bulgarian Suite. Now, this is about to be released by 80 Days and available through Deborah, and it uses Bulgarian folk tunes to create a suite of 6 short pieces with a mixture of very rhythmic pieces and song-like ballads. And what I've done today, for those of you who've tuned in, is I put them up on the chat, so you can actually download the first 2 movements for free. So I'm giving you some free samples of this suite. And the first piece in this is called In the Forest. You can see they're not that long. And the closest analogy is pieces like the Hungarian dances of Bartok. They're quite Bartokian, if you like, in their own way, but they're also definitely me. So here's In the Forest for the Bulgarian sketches for piano. And the second piece, which is also in your giveaways, the Peasant Dance, a more toccata-like piece. So, two of the Bulgarian suite out shortly. And finally, Piano Sonata number 2, which was originally commissioned by Giovanni Pedro, but in fact is now going to be premiered by Roger Lord. And I've just got a little snippet of the first movement just to show you what it sounds like. I'm very pleased with this. It's the hardest piece I've written yet, I think, all told. I rather like this. And so on. So books that are available now from 80dayspublishing.com or from deborahwalnuts.com, more specifically in Canada: Idaho Suite, Jazz Piano Sonata, Connections 9 and Connections 10, out soon, Bulgarian Suite and Second Sonata. And there's a picture of me, and here is me not sharing anymore. So back to you, Derek.
Okay, thanks so much for this. It's a great repertoire there. And people are probably wondering, yeah, this is all stuff in grade 9 and 10 in terms of the CC piano syllabus, and the music can be used on either classical or contemporary idioms piano exams. And so Connections 9 exclusively in grade 9. We put Connections 10, all of those pieces exclusively in grade 10. The Idaho Suite, I don't believe is on the list yet, but we're going to take a look and see where that's going. And then looking through the Bulgarian, some of the first movement anyway is probably only grade 8.
Yeah.
We're going to get those into the syllabus as time goes on here in the next couple of months so that people can start using those. Of course, it came up earlier about, some of the pieces in the RCM books. If anyone, a lot of you already have the RCM books. If you see pieces in there that you want to use that aren't on our list, just scan and send it to the office, deborah@conservatorycanada.ca, and we can have those approved for free to you quite quickly. And if RCM already has it listed, it's pretty much just a rubber stamp for us to have it at the same level if you don't already see it on our lists. Really great. I got one question here for you. I don't know if I've asked this of you before, but you have a lot of different styles. And so I think of like the Eastern preludes where you've got music from Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, even more obscure countries like Brunei. And then you have the Bulgarian suite that you just wrote. What process do you go through from a compositional point of view to sort of inform yourself on on those different types of musics that come from those cultures.
Well, in fact, funnily enough, when I take an existing tune, which is what I'm doing quite a bit of the time, like a folk tune, I don't regard my own material any differently. I mean, a lot of my music is pentatonic anyway, but therefore I just take the tune and think, what does that suggest to me? I can't really say there's any particular process other than you're starting with a row of notes with a particular mode, and then they've got particular rhythms as well. And gradually, as a composer, I fiddle about with them until something comes up, which I think that I like that, whatever it is. And you've noticed, haven't you, that in fact the pieces rove around quite a bit within themselves as well. I like the idea that, I mean, a famous expression which I heard about jazz was somebody said too much repetition can bore an audience, too much variation can alienate an audience. And I think it's the balance of repetition and variation, if you like, which obviously is of interest to me, that you do something and then you repeat it, but you don't necessarily repeat it exactly the same. And then you have a different idea, but you balance it up with remembering the first idea. So I just apply compositional techniques to whatever the material is in front of me. Is that any kind of answer?
Oh, absolutely. And so the seed idea is often a folk tune from a particular culture. Am I reading that right?
It can be like the Eastern Preludes, the Pacific Preludes, the concert collections are all existing tunes, but I regard them in a sense just as tunes. In fact, some of the time, I mean, a good example is the Eastern Preludes, where I've actually invented my own tune, and then the actual tune comes in as almost like a second idea, and I combine the two. So I quite like the idea of also doing something as though I'd been the original writer of the folk tune, if you like. Because tune writing is one of my things. I mean, I do try. I find it fascinating how a small number of notes can suddenly agglomerate into being a strong melody. I mean, I think a prime example has been people like Brahms and Tchaikovsky, where they have, and Dvorak, of course, the biggest tune writer of them all.
Right.
And I'm sort of always fascinated by how something can become incredibly memorable through one means and another. So
I've had a couple of students lately who are more interested in composition and just creating from scratch. They don't write anything down, but they do a lot of improvising and trying to figure out what comes next in this particular tune.
Yeah. It's funny you should say that, because in fact I'm teaching a lot of I'm looking at a lot of compositions at the moment by other people. I do find that process fascinating. And one thing I've discovered is that most people come up with good ideas. Like the first idea is a good one. And I'm saying what you got to bear in mind is if the first idea is good, try and continue with that idea as long as you can get away with. In other words, don't immediately dart off into another idea, but actually work the first idea first. And then once you feel as though you've worked the idea so that it's got enough repetition and variation within itself, then perhaps move gracefully to another idea. But often what happens with student and indeed with adult composition is there are too many ideas, each one of them worse than the one before. In other words, it's a law of diminishing returns. Or you've got something which is far too repetitive. In other words, they come up with an idea, perhaps it might be an arpeggiated idea with no tune, and it's just figuration, basically. And you say, well, this does need to do something more to develop something which is interesting to the listener.
Right.
So those processes are all fairly much the same for me as they are for everybody else. But what I've always said to people is, if you can come up with something, it's probably quite good. So use that as a jumping off point. It's a bit like trying to write a short story or even write a novel. In a way, you just have to write some words down and get started. But gradually, what you've written down, the relationship of that to what you write next becomes clear, and you've got a thread of a story going. Because music is like telling a story in sound, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, interesting. Do you have a process where you catalog different ideas, not necessarily within the context of a composition you happen to be working on, but you're just generating new cells or ideas to be used later?
No, I don't at all. I just write when I write and then don't think about it the rest of the time.
Right. So you stay
But
within the body of the composition from the seed that you've started.
yeah, yeah. I do like coming back to things, but broadly speaking, I don't come back and change that much. I mean, most of the time I did what I did at the time. It feels okay. And in fact, Brighton Bluesy, which you may have come across, which is a relatively new book from 80 Days, again through Deborah, is a wonderful set of pieces. And I wrote them when I was 23. I'm now 69. So they've been sat on my filing cabinet for 40 years, and I got them out, and they still work well. So we put them out. And in fact, they've also entered, two of the pieces have entered another examination board's who shall not be named listing. So they have, there's always potential life in things which you think you know. That's why I say to composers, don't throw anything away, but just come back to it at some later stage and play around with it again if you feel as though you've run out of steam.
Right. Someone's asking in the chat box, Mary. Yeah, there was some music put in the chat box. I've just copied it and pasted it again. If you join late, sometimes you don't see the pre-existing chat that was there in the chat box. So if you can find the chat, the music that Chris is sharing is Suite from the Bulgarian Suite, the #1 and #2 piece there. There's a download link from a Google Drive folder that you can download those first two pieces in the chat box. If anyone has any questions, just throw them in the chat box. In the Q&A, raise your hand, even if you want to come on live and ask. Trying to get a little bit into a little bit of insight into, Chris's process, how he puts all this music together. He's obviously a very prolific writer, and really, this is your full-time gig, right? Is composing?
Yeah, I've been a full-time composer since 1980.
Mm-hmm.
It's really unusual, but Micro Jazz came out in the early 80s, and it's coming up for 2 million sales later. It's still selling, and so it gave me enough income, if you like, to actually not have to do anything else. Although I have done lots of other things like record production and obviously lots of touring work and so on. But basically, I've been a writer all my life, and I can't quite believe my luck because it is a great thing to be able to do if you can do it.
All right.
It's in fact, people often say to me, "What's the secret?" And I say, "Well, dumb luck is part of the secret." I may have told you this before, but when Microjazz first came out, it wasn't written for Boozy and Hawkes. It was actually written for Universal Edition. At the request of their educational music person, they asked me to write something. The brief was graded pieces and popular styles, and I wrote about 40 pieces in a block. And he left the company at that point, and they didn't know what to do with them. So they just sat in my bottom drawer for 2 years until I met Boozy and Hawkes through someone I taught the piano to. And this is just such a wonderful story, because in 1985, my first books were all over the stand at the music trade fair, and the rather kind of lofty guy from Universal Edition came up to the stand because he knew they'd kind of passed on it, and said to my guy, whose name was Rex, who I'm still in contact with, he's known as 80s. He said, how are these going? Because he knew they'd had them in their grasp and hadn't taken them up. And Rex said, very well. And the other guy said, why do you think that is? And Rex said, good marketing. And the other guy from Universal Edition pulled himself up to his full 6'2" and said, well, it must be, because it certainly isn't the music. And Rex gleefully came around to me and said, that's why you're with us and not with them, because if you write something, you've got to find someone who gets it. And I think that's a good thing to say to all composers, is that you've got to find someone or a company or whatever who actually understands what you've done. Otherwise, it'll sit in your bottom drawer. So that's the luck element, because if I hadn't come across him, he wasn't even with Boozy and Hawkes that long, they'd still be in my bottom drawer. Right, and I probably wouldn't be talking to you today. I'd be one of the teachers looking at on the session, if you like.
Right.
Somebody the question is asked, does Deborah want us to publish your pieces like Boozy and Hawkes? The short answer to that is no. In fact, I have Boozy and Hawkes as a publisher for pieces because I'm under contract to them. But the Connection series is published by my own company, 80 Days, which is the connections all the way through. So I have two publisher names there straight away. And funnily enough, the third publisher is Universal Edition, because I have got three books, including Carol Jazz, which is advanced Christmas improvisations, through Universal Edition, which is still on the market as well.
Mhm.
So I'm published by Booz and Hawkes, but I'm also published by myself, but distributed by Deborah Wanless in both cases.
Right. It's a little bit complicated, folks, but that's how it goes. Like in Conservatory Canada, our publisher is Novus Via Music, which head office is in Stratford near Chris there. And yet Hal Leonard Corporation in the States does the printing and distributing.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a bit the same. We have various people printing books, including online publishers. So,
Who publishes your gospel music?
well, that's an interesting case, because in fact, a lot of the time I own that as well, but otherwise it's published by various gospel music publishers, which I still have connections with. I've done many albums. This is recordings I'm talking about, of hymns in particular. And in fact, the series called The Hymn Makers, which I was associated with, sold 500,000 copies. And the series called the Celtic series, which is another gospel series, sold 700,000. So I have a lot of sales behind me of recorded material as well, which is still kind of on the market. These days, most of the material I worked on of that kind, I have available through digital platforms, of course. So it's very different distribution setup.
Right. Well, anyway, I encourage you to check out, we don't have a lot there from Chris right now on the new YouTube channel, but I have some recordings of webinars that some of you may have seen last year on micro musicals, which is an interesting thing. I'm going to post that on the YouTube channel, as well as the music of Wendy Norton, Chris's wife. That's a really neat webinar, and a couple of other ones too that you did with George Litters in Superscore last year. And I may even have a recording of the masterclass that you did about a year ago here with a couple of young composers.
Sure.
So people, take a look on the YouTube channel in the coming week. I'm going to try and post some of those there so you can see some other things. Hopefully your curiosity is piqued here. I know you've all heard Chris's name before, you've seen his music. This is some of the more advanced stuff that's out there now and some of the newer stuff. In fact, all of this is pretty new, more or less. So it's great to see more coming, Chris. What do you have next in the works, plan to write?
Well, the next releases, I've got connections for woodwind, so flute and piano, clarinet and piano in particular, and also for Boozy and Hawkes, I've got some the duet microjazz duets collection 4. There's 3 present duet collections, so the 4th one. I haven't mentioned as well, I've got 2 duet collections coming out through 80 days. Soon, which I'm very pleased with. And one of them's, funnily enough, one of them's based on Turkish folk songs, and the other one is just out of my own head. So, but they're both being field tested by various teachers around the world. Now, one other thing I'd like to mention, by the way, this is the first time that I've mentioned this in any seminar, is I do encourage other young writers, and I've got a young lady in the north of England who's written something which she didn't know she'd done it. But she wrote a sonatina for piano in kind of classical style. The moment I heard it, I thought that would make a great junior concerto. I know that junior concertos are quite a popular item, and so I've arranged the whole piece with piano and strings, but also for a second piano, obviously. And what I'm trying to do, and people might like to contact me. You can contact me by email at, I guess I can say it's at nortonchris@mac.com, NORTONCHRS @mac.com, because I'd like some teachers from Conservatory to try this junior concerto out, to actually field test it for me with students. This is probably a grade 6 to 8 kind of concerto. It's rather nice, and it's got, in fact, I can just share quickly. Have I got time?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen one more time, and there's a picture of me, but forget that. But if I go to this, and I can just show you what this looks like. Here we are, junior concerto. I'm just looking at the best version here. Well, that's the sound. and so on. So isn't that fun?
That sounds neat. What grade level do you think that would be at roughly for
I
us?
I think it's probably grade 5 or 6 actually, the piano part.
Oh,
But it's a very attractive piece, and she's a sort of self-taught composer. She doesn't really know how good she is, and so we're going to put that out. And what we thought we might do is actually have the string orchestra parts available as downloads. So if people decide they'd like to do it with strings, they can download the string parts. Otherwise, it'll be for piano and piano reduction for the other side. Anyway, I just find that very interesting. And simultaneously, I'm also editing like crazy a book of impromptus, which are kind of a combination of Chopin and jazz, if you like, by a very nice composer in Ontario called Frederick Pritchard. And he's working away at those, and I'm working at as his editor to try and get something which we think is reflecting his vision, but also keeping it kind of in the realm of playability, if you like, because they're quite hard pieces. So I'm doing a very, very interesting mixture of things at the moment as a publisher as well.
right. Right. Of course, and always contributing to Superscore too in George's project there.
Well, absolutely. I forgot to mention that I'm just about to finish doing the micro jazz collection. Sorry, the micro jazz duet collections for Superscore, because we have very good backing tracks in MIDI, which were done years ago, have never actually been available, or not as audio anyway. So that's coming out. In fact, I think the duets collection one is now out. So if people look on Superscore, they can find. If you look for Boozy and Hawks and or just type in micro jazz duets collection, you'll find the first collection is there already, and that's for duet, of course, which is quite interesting to work with two digital pianos and Superscore, and actually use the whole backing with two of you playing.
Right. Right. Okay, that's cool. We'll have to check that
Actually,
out.
what am I saying? You can do it on one piano because it's for duet, but what I'm saying is it's not just piano solo.
Right. Right. Anyway, lots of really great stuff here. Susan's just asking, did you arrange, orchestrate the backing tracks as well?
Now that's an interesting point. I did a certain amount, but I mostly worked with a fabulous musician called Frank Meisen, who I worked with for 30 years. He in fact his first gig was playing trombone for the Jackson Five on their first European tour. So he went back a long way, and he was a multi-instrumentalist and the best programmer I've ever come across. He died, unfortunately, younger than me, about 2 years ago. So his legacy lives on in these wonderful backing tracks. And the last job he did was Connections 9 and 10.
Wow.
And in fact, Microjazz Collections 4 and 5 followed that, and the backing tracks for that were done by, guess who? Daniel Meisen, his son, who's also a very talented musician. So the tradition continues, but Frank was really something else. And George Litterst, who some of you will know his work, says he thinks that the MIDI backings, which I've supplied to him, are among the best in the world. They still are. And that was this musician that I worked with all these years.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, stay tuned for a Superscore webinar. We'll have you and George back in the new year, I'm sure.
Yeah.
To show us something else. And thanks for being here today with us and giving us a look into your music and also talking about composition itself. I hope that was stimulating for everybody here, and thanks to those watching on YouTube. So have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next Friday. Bye for now.
Bye for now.